the end of 2020, I heard the news that Carlo had put up empath, and that it was in the Tahoe area. And that was probably when it piqued my interest because I knew it was so close to home, and I knew that it was a climb that was very hard, but like still within my range.
I went down it again after sending it and spent quite a bit of time figuring out trad placements on it, and started to kind of like look at the idea of climbing it on trad, and it made sense to me. Like, I could see it being doable, but dangerous, you know? Like, I just didn't think it was really safe. I just didn't really see it as like something that barely anybody would want to do, much less myself, and I kind of just set it aside and just wasn't really interested in it after that.
The standard beta for the route includes a lot of sloper compression and kind of using these really bad holds and compressing between them, but those holds are formed by these granite runnels in the rock, and I just thought, well, what if you could just jam it? And that's kind of what I ended up doing. I did a lot of hand jams and finger locks and kind of these, cheeky little ring locks. And I think that definitely made the route a bit easier for me, but it also, I thought it made it a bit cooler too. And that's why I figured, well, if there are jams, then there's gear. And if there's gear, well, I can do it without clipping the bolts. And I kind of made that my goal.
I was sort of experimenting with it on gear. I was playing with it as like, this would be a cool challenge, but I was never even remotely close to like actually trying it on gear. And I think there's a huge difference between playing around at the end of the day, trying to learn the gear placements versus actually trying to red point it on gear. I'm like, man, doing it on gear is a lot harder.
The last go of my third day on the route, I one hung it from the very top, and then I ended up sending on the first go of my fifth day on the route.
Good work.
So after sending empath on bolts, I immediately started trying it on gear, but it quickly got too hot as the summer came in, and I had to wait until next season.
I mean, there's not a lot of people that just would have the fire to climb empath on gear, but I definitely would say that Connor's certainly one of them.
There aren't that many next generation climbers who are as well-rounded as Connor is, who are so developed. I mean, Connor, he freed the nose at what, like 14 or 15 or something? It's like, it's pretty wild. Like, that's pretty next level.
I think my experience on granite in the valley, which is largely because of my parents, really fundamentally shaped the climber I am today.
I'm Jim Herson. I'm Connor's dad. Connor's proud dad.
Hi, my name is Ann Smith, and I am Connor Herson's mom.
My wife Ann and I have been climbing 35-ish years.
I started climbing in my late 20s. I met some people through work who were ski mountaineers, and it turned out they were climbers in the off-season. They took me out once. I met my husband, Jim, and we procured a rack, and we just started going out and climbing.
Yeah, it was one of the earlier free ascents of El Cap on the Salté.
My son, Connor, has been exposed to climbing his entire life. When he was very small, we would take him to the climbing gym so he could play with his trains or do whatever. He had very little interest in climbing. So he was just around us and around climbing.
His older sister, we'd go on trips. She's like 4 or 5 years older. And so he kind of always wanted to be with the big kids.
When we were climbing a lot, it was never really important to us whether or not our kids climbed. I think climbing is something because there is an element of danger, and it's not for everybody. I think it's something you have to choose for yourself. And I think it's very clear that you can't make somebody like climbing. You can make them hate it.
I think at first I definitely climbed, but I wasn't really all in on it until about age 8 or 9, and then I was really hooked.
As a little kid, and even before that, he was not very athletic. His coordination came in late. He was kind of floppy. He was just tiny. And it was really interesting the way he developed climbing. He would try really hard when he was, this big, and the routes were set for someone this big. And I don't think he could even do a pull-up. I think he was on-sighting 12 plus before he could do a single pull-up. And that development on doing routes that were too reachy while he had no strength made him the climber he is today. It taught him how to climb. And, people often ask now, how did he get so good? What did you do? What happened? And I'm like, well, I don't know. You climb a lot, have a lot of fun, and don't rely too much on strength and someone else to make it happen for you.
So about 6 months before I turned 14, I set this goal to climb 514 before I turned 14. And I hadn't even done 13D yet, so it was definitely a bit far-fetched, but I had this climb that I kind of set my sights on, which was God's Own Stone at the Red River Gorge in Kentucky. It's one that a lot of kids have success on, and over spring break I was able to do it.
Good job, Connor.
Then I turned 14 and I had this climbing trip where I really had a lot of success on a few other 514s, and I kind of had this idea that was like, what if I could do 14 514s at age 14? Which was definitely very far out and a bit unrealistic, but I guess I kind of improved a lot over that year and I was able to make that work. It was definitely pretty surprising for me.
Before he did the nose, before he even really tried it at all, I talked to Jim and I said, he's going to be a big wall free climber. I said, he's really good at slab and technical climbing. It's his best style. He's not scared of exposure. And at the time when we would go climbing, he would just climb all day long. He'd want to do so many hard pitches in a day.
Watching him send the nose, it was his climb, but I have so much history on that rock and that climb. It was wild watching him. We grew up when Lynn Hill freed it, and it was just next level. That's the 4-minute mile. That's the gold standard. And to Connor, it was like, hey, this is a good climb. I think I'll do it. It's like, okay. On his first go leading the Great Roof, which is really sketchy. I mean, I get scared aiding it. It's thin, and he almost sent it first go, and he did the next go. Leading the nose at 15, he's never going to top that. I mean, he might do harder climbs, but that level, you can't top the nose at 15. I mean, and the style he did it in. He just did it in the weekends, did it fast, placed the gear on lead, and wow, this is next generation. These kids are good.
Free climbing the nose, for me, was definitely a turning point in my climbing career because, well, first of all, it was the first multi-pitch climb that was harder than 511 that I had led and freed. But more importantly, I feel like it kind of made me a bit more ambitious, I feel like, and kind of showed me that I could set more ambitious goals and that free climbing El Cap was within my wheelhouse, which was something that I didn't really realize until the weekend before I sent the nose.
Connor sends the changing corners. 4th go, 3rd day on.
It meant a lot to watch him do it.
So, kind of coming out of the COVID lockdown, I realized that I had done around 30 total 514s, and I had kind of remembered how much fun I had grade chasing the 14 514s, and I kind of thought to myself, well, maybe I could do something similar to that. And I set the goal to climb 50 514s before I turned 18 total. So of the 50 514s that I did, 20 of them were at Jailhouse, which is I guess you could call it my home crag. Usually I go with one of my parents. Most of the time it's with my mom.
A lot of people think of Connor's climbing as really having to do primarily with Jim. And indeed, he's most well known for his trad climbing and his Yosemite climbing, and all of that has been with Jim. But if you probably counted climbing days over the course of his climbing careers, I'm sure that I have done more with Connor than Jim has.
The goal started to feel a bit unrealistic when, with only 7 months to go before my 18th birthday, I still had 14 to go, which was definitely a lot. But then I had a month of climbing at Jailhouse exclusively when I sent 7 514s within just that 1 month period. Being able to do those climbs quickly and being able to do so many within a 1 month period gave me a bit of a boost of confidence, and it also kind of made me realize that I could do something harder at Jailhouse. And what I ended up doing was linking the crux of Motherlode, which is a 14A, some people call it B, then traversing left into a climb called the Shield, which is also a similar difficulty. And then I go and join this other extension, which was actually still a project. So for me, that climb was essentially doing 3 14 minuses stacked on top of each other. And for me, that the whole line was, I thought 14D, but it hasn't been repeated yet, and I could see it getting downgraded or upgraded. So
He's really currently, I would say by far, the strongest climber at that cliff. He's not a little boy anymore. He's the one who's breaking the grades, creating the new routes, pushing the limits. It's really marked a kind of a turning point, in the relationship. Even though he could drive which climbs he chose, previously, I think I was driving the overall, we're going to go here, then we're going to go there, and this is what we're going to do. But at Jailhouse, he interacts with the other climbers as a peer, not as a kid, and has really developed to the leading climber there.
I definitely do feel very lucky to be able to spend all this time with my parents, and I feel very lucky that they've kind of given me access to this sport and that they've supported me throughout my entire childhood. And when I was still not too enthusiastic on climbing, they didn't push it at all, but then when I was, they really gave me all the resources I needed to pursue it. And I think just to be able to spend more time with them now is really special.
He has other areas where he has capabilities. He's really good at school, has very much of a math brain, and if, for example, he wanted to become a professional climber someday, that's fine, but not before exploring other options as well. I just want him to be a nice person and develop, fully, contribute what he can.
But he's a nerd through and through. He's not going to give up school. He's innately interested in stuff.
I feel like I kind of have these two separate passions where I really do enjoy climbing a lot, and I think it's just the sport that I've really have loved for so long, and it's always going to be a part of my life. But at the same time, I do really enjoy school, and I do really enjoy academics and being able to push myself in that regard. I don't think I really want to be a full-time professional climber because it would mean giving up my academics, and at the same time, I don't want academics to fully take over my life because then I wouldn't be able to climb. So I think I wanted to keep that balance for as long as I can. I first tried empath on gear almost immediately after doing it as a sport climb. But the cliff, it is more of a spring-fall cliff, and that was in late June, early July, so it got too hot really quickly. And at that point, I kind of decided to wait until the fall to try it some more. But then that fall, the Caldor fire broke out, and it just absolutely swept through that entire area, and the landscape has just changed so drastically. My first time hiking back out there this year, I was noticing all the burnt trees.
And the trees are all like covered in soot.
And along the approach, there are a bunch of boulders and granite slabs, and what was really striking to me was that the heat from the fire had actually cracked the granite. And it was like the outer shell of the granite was just coming off. And I was really worried that this would happen to empath, because if it did, the climb would essentially be unclimbable, or if it would take an extensive amount of cleaning, and it would basically be a new route.
We didn't know if the cliff was going to be destroyed from the fire, and we got out there and it wasn't. And it was a little bit damp, and he kind of went bolt to bolt and checked it out, and it was intact. And in fact, that day he did his first clean dress rehearsal. He placed 10 pieces of gear, and I like to think of it, you placed 8 pieces for you and 2 extra for me.
Almost his first go, he got to the last piece, and then it took him a while until he could step above. And it takes confidence to step above a piece. I mean, that's the difference right there between gear and bolts, is you really have to trust yourself on gear.
I had fallen at the top several times in that top boulder, and at one point I actually got a little freaked out and down climbed and took on that last 0.3 cam because I just didn't feel fully confident over it. So gaining enough confidence to go for that section of climbing without worrying about the fall was really critical. So after getting some good sleep that night, the first go of the next day, I just really focused on the climbing and not the fall, and I focused on the moves, which I knew perfectly by then, and I knew how every hold felt, how every gear placement felt, how every body position felt, and it just felt like I knew that route perfectly. So you start out with your left hand on the side pull, right hand on a pinch, which is mostly a thumb catch. Do a big move with your right hand. And then I started bumping my left hand up, and I end up in a bit of a left hand finger lock. From there, I cross right hand into a fist jam, and then I can pull up to this pod that has really good hand jams in it. And that's where I place my first 2 pieces of gear, both of which are Black Diamond number 2 cams. And I can rest there for a bit. From there, I kind of have a left hand fist jam and pull up right hand to a sloper side pull, and I bump from there to another hold that was pretty much identical to the first. And then I walk my feet up in the jam and bump my left hand to a pinch. From there, I get a really high right heel hook and bump my right hand into an underclinging hand jam. I pull up left hand to a side pull. From there, I can get my left foot in a toe jam and my right foot in a really high toe jam right by my right hand. You really have to kind of trust that right hand toe jam. It's a bit of a blind placement, but it's really solid. Once I place that, I feel pretty solid. And from there, I can reach up right hand into a sloper and then bump to the very back of it where I can get a hand jam. And then from there, I can reach up with my left hand and place a small wire. That placement is very blind, and if you get the placement right, it's good, but it's really easy to get the placement shallow, in which case it can pop really easily. And once you get that placement, I don't feel very confident because I'm not entirely sure if it's solid, but I know that it's backed up on a good piece. And then I get a left hand side pull, and then I get a really tight right drop knee. And from there I can cross all the way to a good right hand finger lock. It's not great, but if you just trust it, you can kind of just relax on it. From the finger lock I can reach to a left hand jam. And from there I place silver 0.4 right where that finger lock was, which is a really good placement. I can see it, I know it's good. And I can also rest on that hand jam for a while. And that's kind of the first break in the route for me, where I can kind of slow my heart rate, reset a bit, and then kind of move into the next crux. Then I bring my right hand up to a Gaston side pull. And from there I have to get a really high left foot, which is a bit of a smear, and just trust it. And from there I probably do the hardest placement of the route, where I place an offset cam of 0.2, 0.3 Z4 right above my hand. And from there I cross my left hand just above that placement, bring my right hand in, and then I get a really high, tight right drop knee. Again, kind of similar to the one I had before. And then I bring my right hand up to this cheeky little ring lock. It's not very good, but if I just trust it, and just trust that it'll hold, it works most of the time. And then I walk my left foot a little bit further out. I found a drop knee from there, where I can kind of place a 0.4, 0.5 offset Z4 cam right down by my right ankle. And it's a pretty low placement. From there, I reach my right hand up to a finger lock, and then it's a big move into a left hand side pull, which is about a 1 pad edge, slightly uncut. And I can bring my right hand above it, and that's the last rest. And that's where I really try to slow my heart rate and get psyched for the red point crux, which is right above it. And while I'm in that rest, I place 2 cams, a 0.3, which is the most essential cam of the whole route because it protects the next few moves. And then to the right of it, I kind of back it up with a 0.2, 0.3 offset. And both of those placements are shallow, but they're both pretty solid. After I rest, I go right hand up to kind of a Gaston side pull, And then I actually crossed my left hand under my right hand, which I used to walk my left foot way out to my left, bump my left hand up to a pretty good pinch, will match that left hand side pull, bring my left foot up too. Then it's a really big committing move to a good side pull. And that, once you hit that side pull, for me, the route was pretty much done because I can get a 0.75 cam right behind it. And then I was nervous on the top section because it still is like a V3 or V4 boulder, but I was still not gonna fall there because I'd done so much climbing up to that point where I really did not want to fall there. Let's go! Yeah, Connor! To me, sending that route was very special because although I hadn't been trying it consistently, it was definitely on my radar and it was a goal of mine for the previous year. When I sent the route, it didn't feel like it was fully my limit. It felt solid and I didn't feel that close to falling at any point, so it felt really special to kind of finish that goal, but also finish it in a way where I knew that I could definitely do something harder too.